Welcome back to the Grease Goblins Rereads channel. Today's video is a very exciting one as we'll be starting out our A Storm of Swords reread. Every single week I'll be diving into a new chapter and analyzing / summarizing everything that happens. We're deep diving into every page. It isn't just like a little 20-minute summary. So if you're interested in that, feel free to subscribe, like, comment, all that stuff so that you do not miss a single upload, as these will probably be ranging until we finish the book into the next 1.5 to 2 years. So before we dive into the actual chapter, I do want to just look at what are prologues normally like in this series. And in the first book and the second book, they were very different. The first book, it was all about kind of establishing the threat of the others, the White Walkers, and overall just this series as a whole. I don't think it was necessarily your traditional open for a book in terms of how the rest of the series is, but it was more for an opening to the series. Whereas A Clash of Kings was like very different in terms of it was much more focused on that specific story with the open introduction of the character of Stannis Baratheon through the eyes of Cresson. It was a lot more plot focused on the War of the Five Kings and especially the conflict between Renly and Stannis. And so I think that the third book, what George was going for with the open was, one, he wanted to combine those elements. He wanted to combine how he did the first chapter of Game of Thrones and the first chapter of A Clash of Kings into a more, okay, this is, yes, we're going to be focusing on the others, the same vibe of the first book, but also have it be more impactful to the tone of this book, especially the themes that are going to be present throughout A Storm of Swords, and then also having a very plot-relevant chapter to characters like Jon, Samwell, and the Northern plotline as a whole. So with all that being said, let's dive into the first chapter and first page of A Storm of Swords. Now, getting into page 1, I will say with the character of Chett, a very minor character. You would be completely forgiven for not even knowing who this character is. But if you go all the way back to book 1, this is the character that gets displaced by Sam when Sam is made like a steward, an assistant for Maester Aemon. Chett is the one that loses his job. And we've seen Chett here and there throughout A Game of Thrones and A Clash of Kings, but as of right now, he's been a very minor character. And so a very interesting choice for George to give us kind of the flip of Jon and Sam, a very antagonistic character at the Night's Watch. But Chett notes how the day was gray and bitterly cold, and the dogs refused to follow the bear's scent. One of the dogs sniffed the tracks once, then backed away and returned to the pack with her tail down. The hounds huddled together on the riverbank, miserable as the wind snapped at them. Chett felt the cold biting through his layers, thinking it was too cold for man or beast, yet they were stuck there. And right off the intro of this chapter, something kind of seems wrong. Why aren't the dogs tracking this bear? It seems very odd for tracking dogs specifically, and it's supposed to mean for me right away is that likely this bear is the undead. It's actually not a real like bear in the sense of it's living. And so that's why the dogs seem to react very indifferent to it, not wanting to track it. Now, this also could just be old bear prints, but given what we're going to see, I do think it's interesting that we start off this book with bear prints. And especially if this bear is dead, think about where Jeor Mormont and the sigil of his house, and the Mormonts being, well, a bear more or less. It's interesting because he's going to die, so you have another dead bear. I think there's a lot of that in this first chapter that George does with the Storm of Swords in terms of foreshadowing things very subtly, whether that be with the others or even the fate of Jeor Mormont. Another thing we do notice is how cold it is. That's a common, I would say, trend or trope at this point with the wall plot line specifically, but it's something that George puts a lot of importance on throughout this chapter. Chett resented being there, imagining he should be safe at the wall, tending ravens and helping Maester Aemon. He blamed Jon Snow and Sam Tarly for the situation, as he's freezing in the haunted forest with the dogs. Another thing to note is I really do think that Chett is a little bit misplaced in his hatred, because yes, he's looking for someone to blame, but even if Chett was still in his job, in his role with Maester Aemon, he'd still likely be sent on this party because he is familiar with the ravens. He would be able to utilize them. Now, somebody else would have to write and read the messages or whatnot, but he would be probably in charge of just sending them away, as he knows how to use the birds. Cursing, Chett yanked the leashes and orders the dogs to track the bear, promising meat if they found it. But the hounds only whimpered and pressed closer together as Chett cracked his whip above them and the black dog snarled in response. He threatened the dog meat would be just as good as bear, and Lark the sisterman stood nearby with arms crossed and hands tucked into his armpits, complaining his fingers were frozen despite wearing gloves. Lark grumbled that it was too cold to hunt and that the bear wasn't worth freezing for. So you're really painting the atmosphere right now. It's growing colder. By the second, it would appear the dogs and the animals are acting very strangely. It's always an indicator by George of what is to come, especially with the others. You think back to, well, book 1, because it's the last time we've actually seen the others. Ghost acted very unnaturally, and some of the other animals as well, I believe, when the bodies were presented, like the dogs didn't want to sniff them. It's something that George does consistently to show the others are coming. Getting into page 2, Small Paul insists they can't return empty-handed because the Lord Commander wouldn't approve, gripping his spear with frozen snot on his face. Lark dismisses this, saying Mormont will be dead before daybreak, so it doesn't matter what he wants. And that's another point, is we're introducing that what this chapter is going to be about is an assassination attempt upon some of the leadership and just the people at the Night's Watch. Paul seems confused and questions why they have to kill Mormont instead of just leaving him alone. Lark argues Mormont would hunt them down, asking if Paul wants to be hunted, as Paul refuses the idea of being hunted and agrees they should kill him. Lark suggests they should kill all the officers. And Chett, irritated, clarifies the plan. Kill Mormont, Blaine, Grubbs, Athan, Dywin, Barman, and Sam for the Ravens. It's this interesting point where we see that Chett has come up with this plan to basically assassinate specific people so that they can escape. He doesn't want to kill everybody, but just the people that matter. Leadership, so that the person in charge would not really care about them deserting as much as he would retreating back to the wall. Or killing the people that can send messages back to the wall of them deserting. Or people that can track them. It's much more of a targeted assassination attempt. I know myself, just reading this chapter and recording, that I thought about a lot in American history. Sorry, I reference American history a lot in these videos and these series. I'm just American, that's where my brain goes to. But for one of our own presidents who was assassinated, Abraham Lincoln, there was actually a bigger plot there that some people might not know, that there was supposed to be an assassination attempt on more people that were in power in the Union by John Wilkes Booth and his conspirators. It reminds me a lot of this, where you have a situation where you have a plan to kill these different people, but if even one of those things goes wrong, it kind of destroys the whole plan as a whole. And that's what you're seeing here with Chett, and that's why he tells Lark, like, we can't do that because you're now wanting more people to be killed. There's more chances for failure and for risk of discovery. And that's what Chett's kind of telling him in this chapter, and really to us, the audience, as well. Chett stresses they must do it quickly in their sleep, warning that one scream could doom them all, as Chett orders Lark to handle his part and reminds Paul the attack is during the third watch, not the second. Paul confirms he'll remember and that he'll be on watch with Softfoot. The conspirators have arranged the watches so most sentries are their own men, giving them the best chance to act under a moonless sky, as Chett plans to escape before the wildlings arrive, determined to survive. And it's really interesting to see how people can manipulate the Night's Watch. Having all your men as sentries is definitely going to be an easier transition to try and desert. It's interesting because we see stuff like this happen in the future in both this book and Dance with the Night's Watch and their corruptness, some of the things John will have to tackle in book 5. I think a lot of this is really interesting and foreshadows some of the future events. Chett notes that 300 Night's Watch brothers had ranged north to find the missing rangers like Benjen and Waymar Royce, and learn why the wildlings abandoned their villages. They haven't found the missing men, but discovered the wildlings have gathered in the Frostfangs. Chett doesn't care about the wildlings' fate, and is only focused on himself. And I think right now what Chett is thinking is what a lot of men in this situation would be feeling. Okay, we've ranged a good portion of the way north. We've realized the wildlings are now marching south. They're going to be marching on the wall. It's the only place they could be theoretically going. We haven't found Benjen and Waymar Royce, but that would largely indicate that probably they have died, given that they have not made it to the wall. If they had been captured by wildlings, they would have been tortured and likely then killed. At this point, if you were an average person that didn't have any vested interest in finding Benjen or Waymar, this is exactly the way you'd be feeling. We found out what the wildlings are likely doing. Now, not the whole truth. We don't know, like, for instance, they're trying to find the Horn of Winter to blow the wall down and, that kind of idea. But overall, we know that they're coming to strike at the wall, so let's go back and defend the wall, prepare ourselves, instead of trying to meet them on their own terms. As that gets us into page 3. Chett realizes that the wildlings are not staying in the Frostfangs, but are coming down along the Milkwater. He looks at the icy river and understands Mance Rayder's massive host is moving the same way. Thorin Smallwood returned days earlier with news relayed by Kedge Wide-Eye around the fire. Kedge reports the wildlings are advancing from the foothills, led by Harma Dogshead with a mounted vanguard. A scout considered killing Harma with an arrow, but Smallwood stopped him, as they wanted to basically keep stealthily so that the wildlings did not know that they were there. When asked their numbers, Kedge says there are many and more, estimating 20 to 30,000. Harma's vanguard alone has 500 mounted fighters, an unusually large number for wildlings. The main host is enormous, moving slowly but steadily and not returning to their villages. Over half the group are women and children, bringing animals like goats, sheep, and even aurochs pulling sledges. They carry all their possessions, furs, meat, chickens, butter churns, and tools, loading down both animals and people. The entire host is following the Milkwater, which will lead them past the Fist of the First Men where the Watch is camped. It's clear to many that they should retreat to the wall, as their defenses won't hold against such numbers. So let's break this down a little bit. I spent a lot of time in A Clash of Kings specifically, and a Game of Thrones, with Gior's plan, and I've talked about it consistently that I think it's a very bad one. The idea of wanting to find information on the others, the White Walkers, and the wildlings makes sense to a degree, but the idea that you're taking the strongest portion of your forces out into your enemy's territory, you are now losing your advantage, which is the wall, and now at this point, you have gathered enough information to realize what the wildlings are doing. You haven't really gathered much on, what are the White Walkers or the others doing at this point. But overall, you would say this mission has been a success. You've gained the knowledge. It's probably time to go back at this point. You do not have nearly the men to try and fight them or anything like that. So at this point, it's time to probably retreat. But that's not what ends up happening. So let's talk about what overall the plan's going to be here coming in the next couple sentences and next page. Despite this, Thorin Smallwood argues they should attack, believing the wildling force is disorganized and weak. He claims a single strike could scatter them and send them fleeing for decades. Chett sees this as madness. 300 men against tens of thousands, and worse, Smallwood is convincing others, even nearing persuading the old bear. Getting into page 4, Smallwood argues that if they wait too long, they'll lose their chance to strike the wildlings. So why do I have so much criticism of this plan when, in reality, it is the exact thing that beats the wildlings with Stannis? Well, for one, we have to remember Stannis' men are a lot more battle-tested. They are a lot more trained better, I should say. I really worded that badly, than, say, the Night's Watch is overall. And the other thing is, when you look at the scale of things, 300 men versus Stannis, who has like a couple thousand men. Very different scaling. You can do a lot more with that, especially given Stannis' men are all mounted. I know the Night's Watch are as well, but it's still very different going from 300 to a few thousand. Now, the other thing to note here is the context of it. When Stannis does his attack, it is when the wildlings are assaulting the wall. They're not worried about threats from north of the wall, besides maybe the White Walkers or the others, whatever you want to say there. They're not expecting the Night's Watch to have the power to marshal thousands of men and attack them on their flanks. That's just not something they could even comprehend. Here, you're looking at 300 men that are walking into the wildlings' basically home field advantage. They know these places way better than the Night's Watch do. That's what A Clash of Kings, really Jon's second half arc, was all about. The idea that you are then going to use their land against them while having way fewer numbers, where basically every man that you have needs to be worth like 20 to 30 wildlings. It's just not feasible with the quality amount of men you have, and also trying to take them unawares when they have things like wargs and stuff like that. It's just not going to work. And so I think this plan is very arrogant, in my opinion. I think a lot of what the Night's Watch does in these first 3 books is quite arrogant, and I just don't think it would really work out overall. Sir Otten Withers, in response to Thorin Smallwood, says that the Watch is meant to defend and not throw itself away recklessly, which I totally agree with. Smallwood insists offense is the best defense, claiming a swift attack would be more effective than caution. But I really don't think that's the case when you have such fewer numbers and given the situation. Like, let's even think about, say, for instance, Robb and his campaign in A Clash of Kings, and I guess a little bit into A Storm of Swords, where he has less men than the Lannisters in almost any turn. And the reason that is because, one, they're not expecting him to be there, and his military tactics are brilliant. Here, again, you're going to be expected. They know you're here. It's not like, oh, you're some force that they don't know is there. It's just really important to understand the differences between, Robb and Stannis versus what the Night's Watch is planning. But either way, the final decision rests with Lord Mormont, who is waiting on scouts like Jarman, Buckwell, and Corran Halfhand. These scouts are overdue, and Chett assumes they're likely dead, imagining Jon Snow frozen and killed, which pleases him, which he is right to assume that they are likely dead. Deciding that the hunt is pointless, Chett orders a return to the Fist with the dogs eager to leave. He reflects that he has deliberately starved the dogs for 3 days to make them vicious, and then that night the plan is to release them among the horses after others cut the tethers, causing chaos in the camp. And all I'll say with Chett is, I do not like abuse of animals, and starving them is definitely a big no-no, so don't like that, Chett. Panicked horses and attacking dogs would create confusion, allowing the conspirators to slip away unnoticed. It's a good idea and definitely could help them. Though Lark wanted more men involved, Chett insists 14 is enough to keep the plan secret and effective. And I do agree once again with Chett that when you start introducing more men, you're having the risk of people backing out, not doing their part, or even being exposed and then killed. Now, as the situation grows more dire, think about what's going to happen with the Night's Watch after this chapter. Obviously, people become more desperate. They become more frustrated with leadership. That's when you start recruiting more and more people. Right now, you're kind of like in the infancy of that. So I think that's really important as well. Chett personally recruited many of them, including the immensely strong but slow Small Paul. Other members include Dirk and Softfoot, a stealthy and dangerous man with a violent past. And I do want to just say it is horrible the things he does. I'm not going to say them just so YouTube doesn't cancel me, but just know he is a horrible piece of shit. Moving on. Chett prides himself on being the mastermind, bitter that Jon Snow replaced him as Maester Aemon's steward with Sam Tarly. He plans to kill Sam, whispering a message before cutting his throat. Confident in handling the ravens, Chett intends to release them afterward to prevent any warnings reaching the wall, as we get into page 5. And to be honest, I do think that Chett is right to want to basically get rid of the birds, because then messages can't be sent to the wall. They could basically arrive back and just say, we got lost with our party, or we're the last remaining remnants of the party that got destroyed, and there's no messages telling them differently, so that they can get south of the wall. So it does make sense. I do think killing Sam you don't necessarily need to do, but I understand that it's from a personal motivation standpoint from Chett. Chett then goes over the roles in the mutiny, as Softfoot and Small Paul will kill Mormont, Dirk will kill Blaine, and Lark with his cousins will kill Bannon and Dywyn. They've been secretly storing food for 2 weeks, and Donnell and Clubfoot Carl will prepare the horses for escape. Chett then expects that with Mormont dead, command will fall to the weak Sir Otten Withers, who will retreat to the wall instead of pursuing them. So with all this being said, I think it's a good plan. Taking out the leadership, the people that would want to come and get you, it seems like a well thought out plan. But again, planning is planning. Things can always go awry, as we will see. As they return, Chett sees the Fist lit with torches in the dark, the ring wall glowing atop the hill. I really like the idea of how George paints the atmosphere, as it's a very cold day, or going into night at this point, and you have the dogs are not reacting normally, and now we're also seeing that the Fist seems like this light in a cloud of darkness, of cold that's kind of driving in on the Fist. While crossing an icy brook, Lark shares his plan to flee the coast, build a boat, and sail back to the sisters. Chett thinks Lark will be executed as a deserter if he returns home, since leaving the Watch means death anywhere in the Seven Kingdoms. And I believe that Chett's right. If you are somebody deserting the Wall, you don't want to go somewhere where people will know you. And that's not to say that, like, maybe your family won't cover for you or whatnot, but it just takes any single person, witnessing who you are. Like, say a random shopkeep sees you, they can go, "Oh, that guy, he's a deserter. You should probably kill him." You want to go somewhere that people don't know you or isn't that close to where people might notice you. So, like, say for instance, you're from the Riverlands. Well, maybe when you desert, maybe you should go to like the Reach or the Stormlands, or if you're really feeling ballsy, go to Dorne and hope you survive. But that would be what you should likely do, not go back to your home. The others came and went. They took my power out, reinstalled it, all that stuff. Nice little bit of foreshadowing, I would say. As the recording goes, there's a storm that wipes out my power, and a storm of swords. It's almost always raining. Also, in our little intermission, Rhea has decided to grace us with her presence. This is going to be a short visit, so Rhea, say hi to the people. Another man, Allo, plans to flee to Tyrosh, where punishments are less severe, as Chett considers going but dismisses it since he doesn't speak the language and lacks useful skills. The one problem you have with deserting the Night's Watch specifically is you can't really return to places where people know you, because then you're just going to be executed, obviously. So where do you go? And I will say one thing, especially if you're not known that well, you could probably just easily take off your Night's Watch clothing, find some other type of clothing, and just go to some area that you've never been to before. Chett reflects on his upbringing in Hagsmire, where his father collected leeches and forced him to help, even beating him for wasting one. Chett has no desire to return home and instead envies the life at Craster's Keep. He imagines living like a lord there, even joking about having a banner of leeches. It's really interesting because there's also some nice foreshadowing to both Roose Bolton and the Freys, as when he actually gets caught and is sent to the wall, it's by the Freys. There's a lot of nice, little bit of foreshadowing to what we'll see later on as the leeches, which Roose Bolton, I would say the Leech King himself, will eventually become the person ruling the North. It's a nice little bit of foreshadowing there as well. Another thing George does really well in these opening chapters is he always does a good job of painting these people as real individuals. How did they become who they are? And for Chett's case, very troubled past, some bad situation, but then also, how do you look at nature versus nurture? Like, what part of this came from Chett making his own decisions and Chett being born into it? So I think there's some really nice stuff there that George paints with the character of Chett. Chett's ambition grows to imagining himself as king like Mance Rayder with wives and power. He fantasizes about taking Craster's wives, using the older ones for labor and the younger ones for pleasure and children. He believes Craster wouldn't resist once Smallpaw dealt with him. And Chett at this point is living a fantasy. He believes once he deserts, he can start off his whole new life and get everything that he's never had. And obviously, this is very normal. This is what a lot of people think of at times. And Chett, unfortunately, is not going to get any of these things. As we get into page 6. Chett reflects that the only women he's known were prostitutes from Molestown, as girls in his village rejected him because of his appearance. He remembers Bessa mocking him despite his effort to win her with flowers, saying she'd rather sleep with leeches than him. Enraged, Chett stabbed her, taking satisfaction in her reaction, and stabbed her again. He was captured and judged by one of Walder Frey's bastards, then sent to the wall with Yoren, losing his freedom for that act. Chett bitterly thinks his entire life was taken from him at that one moment. And what's so interesting is George gives us a chance to understand who Chett is, talking about his background. But then instantly we see Chett do some horrible thing like stabbing a woman just because she won't sleep with him. What a great precedent we should set by this Chett. Oh, every time a woman doesn't want to be with you, just stab them. Just kill them. Because you picked them flowers, that means that they should open their legs for you. Chett, not a good thing to think about. And the saddest part about all of this is there's people like this in real life that think like this. Chett now intends to reclaim his life and take what he wants, inspired by Craster's way of taking wives by force. You're headed down the wrong path when Craster is your source of inspiration. He vows not to repeat past mistakes and believes the mutiny plan will succeed if they escape cleanly. He expects Sir Ottenweider's to retreat towards the wall rather than pursue them due to his cautious nature. On the other hand, Thorne Smallwood might push for an attack, but Chett believes Wyther's authority and caution will prevail. He considers that if the entire ranging force dies, no one will come looking for them though, assuming they perished as well. He's briefly tempted by this idea that actually he wants Thorne Smallwood to be in charge, just given the fact that that would mean that likely all of them would be annihilated, and people would just chalk it up to, oh, Chett and all these other men likely died. But the plan is a little too risky as it would require killing more guarded officers. As they walk, Smallpaw asks about the old bear's raven and who will feed it if Mormont is killed, as Chett reacts with irritation, dismissing the concern about the bird, as we get into page 7. Chett dismisses concern about Mormont's raven again, telling Paul they can kill it if needed. But Paul worries Talking Bird might reveal their actions, but admits that's unlikely after Chett explains the obvious evidence of murder. Yeah, could you imagine? Oh, what happened here? There's a dead body here, but what happened? And then the bird just goes, oh, it was murder. Like, obviously. I mean, that is a little fun little note there. George does have some nice comedy in this sea of darkness of this first chapter. Paul then asks to keep the bird, and Chett agrees just to appease him, but Lark jokes about eating the bird, prompting Paul to warn him not to touch it. Chett silences them as they near the fist and hear voices ahead. They approach the camp where men are practicing archery near the forest's edge, as Lark points out Samwell Tarly mocking him as a pig with a bow. Seeing Sam reignites Chett's resentment over losing his easy position serving Maester Aemon, and he reflects that his duties had been simple and free of abuse, unlike most of his life. Chett resents Sam's status and literacy, imagining killing him with his knife. He tells the others to go ahead while he stays to watch as the dogs pull towards camp, expecting food, but Chett kicks one of them to calm them. Chett, George can make a nice backstory for you, but harming animals is just, that's no good. That's just no good at all. He watches Sam struggle with a longbow, taking aim before completely missing the target. Chett laughs in disgust at Sam's failure as Dolores Ed comments that he'll be blamed for the lost arrow, joking about how he's always blamed since losing his horse in the snow. As we get into page 8, Gren encourages Sam to steady the bow while Sam complains about its weight but continues. His second shot goes high, missing the target again. Dolores Ed jokes about Sam knocking leaves off trees and complains about the cold, urging him to shoot the last arrow. One thing we're constantly told in this chapter is that it's getting colder. And that's something that, yes, throughout Jon's storyline we see where Jon will think about the cold, but it never gets to this level, usually. Usually it's cold, but it's not getting colder. And here it seems to be. Sam hesitates, nearly giving up, but Gren pushes him to try again. Sam quickly fires the final arrow, this time hitting the target low in the chest. Shocked and excited, Sam asks if he hit and if it would have killed a real target. Gren confirms the idea while Ed humorously notes trees don't have lungs. Ed takes the bow and admits he's seen worse shots, as Sam beams with pride until he notices Chett watching, which kills his excitement. Chett mocks him, saying hitting a tree means nothing against real enemies like Mance Raider's fighters. He vividly describes how Sam would panic and be killed in battle, terrifying him. Now, I will say this. Chett is right, like, okay, you shot an arrow at a tree that's not moving, and you're also not under any stress. That likely, yeah, Samwell would be killed. Like, he is stating the obvious, but at the same time, do you really got to be an ass about it? You know, he's trying to get better so that eventually he'll be good enough to where that won't happen. So, yeah, Chett just comes off as very bitter and a very sour individual, reflecting who he is. But another thing that's so interesting about how Chett describes Samwell dying in this battle is he specifically notes that Samwell would piss down his leg. Ironic, given where the ending of this chapter is going to go. Sam begins shaking because of these taunts, and Ed steps up, sarcastically defending him. Ed makes a joke about Chett's threat, basically saying that, oh, it's not going to be like how yours was, Chett, where you got your head split in two and half your wits fell out. Gren laughs, and even Sam manages a weak smile after the joke. Angry, Chett yanks the dogs and leaves, thinking bitterly that they'll see who laughs later and wishing he could kill Ed too, as we get to page 9. The climb up the fist is steep, even on the gentler side, and the dogs grow restless, barking for food. Chett responds by once again kicking them, and using his whip to keep them in line. After tying them up, he reports to Mormont that the tracks were found, but the dogs wouldn't follow, possibly because they were old. It's possible. I also just think this is more than likely an undead bear. That's what I think it is, but who knows. Mormont expresses disappointment, noting fresh meat would have been helpful, while his raven repeats, meat. Chett thinks of eating the dogs, but says nothing, leaving after being dismissed and feeling satisfied it's the last time he'll serve Mormont. He kind of gives me this vibe of like, oh, you know when you're about to quit a job, and like, oh, it's your last day, and your boss tells you something, and you know, oh, this is the last time I'm going to have to do this? It's like that, but if you were going to murder your boss. As weirdly as that sounds. The cold feels even worse, and Chett briefly considered huddling with the dogs, but instead wraps his face and keeps moving to stay warm. He walks the perimeter, chewing sourly, talking with guards to gauge their thoughts, and none of the guards are part of the mutiny, and most are simply focused on how cold it is. It kind of gives me this vibe of like Chett having this nervous energy. You know, he's preparing for this mutiny. He doesn't know if it's going to go well. He can't really sleep, so let's just walk the grounds. Also, it's cold, so keeping your blood warm is probably a good idea as well. The wind then rises, making an eerie sound through the ring wall, which some compare to a crying child. Interesting given the idea that there's a lot of speculation that Craster is basically sacrificing his sons to the others, and now we're getting a sound that references that. I think that's very important as well to really show what is about to happen. Returning to the dogs, Chett finds Lark waiting and mentions the officers are arguing in Mormont's tent. Chett dismisses it as typical behavior of high-born men who talk endlessly. He even gives a really nice line about how the high noblemen, they get drunk off of words, whereas normal people get drunk off of wine. I think it's actually a nice visualization of, for instance, the stuff that happens at King's Landing and all the politics that happens throughout this series. Lark warns that Small Paul is still worried about the ravens and whether they've stored food for it. Chett dismisses the concern, saying ravens eat corpses. Lark jokes the raven might eat Paul's corpse, but Chett internally thinks Lark is more expendable than Paul. Chett then tells Lark to focus on his role, trusting Paul will handle his part. Now, what I think is interesting is we actually have a little nod to the A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms novellas, is that in this, Lark basically calls Paul thick as a castle wall. And for book readers, you know that's actually exactly what they call Dunk, more or less. That's something that's repeated throughout that story a lot. So it's a nice little nod to those little stories and maybe the things that George had been planning for the novellas overall. As we get into page 10, as twilight falls, Chett sharpens his sword, keeping his gloves on to avoid freezing to the steel. The dogs whimper in the dark, and he gives them water while reminding them they'll soon fend for themselves. He smells supper and heads to the cook fire, where Dywin is commenting on how unnaturally silent the woods are. Dywin notes the absence of frogs, owls, and wolves, making the forest feel dead. If you've ever been hiking in the woods, think about it like this. Whenever you're in the woods and you're traveling, you hear bugs, you might hear birds, you might hear whatever. In this situation, just imagine you're out in the wilderness and you hear nothing. It's this wind that sounds like a crying child, and that's all you hear. Just really good, I think, atmosphere building by George. Chett dismisses it though, suggesting the animals have gone somewhere warmer. Sitting by the fire, Chett eats and studies the men involved in his plot for signs of weakness. Dirk appears calm, quietly sharpening his blade as usual. Donnell Hill jokes easily, presenting confidence despite Chett's distrust of bastards and pretty boys. Now, it is interesting to note that Donnell Hill claims to be a Lannister bastard, which could be very interesting if that is the case. Sawwood seems restless, while Macelin looks especially nervous, sweating and unable to eat. This is what you have to deal with. These men are putting their lives on the line. Even though they are doing this mutiny and it's been planned out, one small mistake will cost them all their lives. Chett notes Macelin as a potential problem he'll need to watch closely. Suddenly, a call to assemble spreads across the camp, summoning all the men to the central fire. Chett finishes eating and joins the other, feeling uneasy because why is this meeting being called? They haven't been being called in the last few days. A decision must have been made. Mormont stands before the fire with several officers behind him, his raven perched on his shoulder. Chett senses something is wrong as the Lord Commander prepares to address them. As we get into page 11, Mormont announces the wildlings are advancing down the Milkwater with their vanguard expected in about 10 days. He explains the experienced fighters are with Harma Dogshead, while others guard the rear or stay near Mance Raider. The wildling force is large but poorly equipped, with many untrained fighters using primitive weapons. They are slowed by women, children, animals, and all their possessions, making them vulnerable. Mormont emphasizes that the wildlings likely don't know the Watch's position. And I just want to say we've talked about all this already. It's just Mormont addressing it publicly. A lot of these men already know this information just based on word of mouth. People just finding out all this information. So it's really Mormont for PR reasons kind of telling them the situation, even though it's already kind of been said. And I think rightfully, as this is being said, Chett internally believes that this is false. He assumes the missing scouts were captured and revealed their location, which I think is pretty relevant, but you've also got to remember, they have wargs. The wildlings can transform into animals and see their position, just like how we saw in A Clash of Kings. That's how Jon was tracked down with Qhorin. So, in my opinion, it's pretty obvious, maybe not so much to the Night's Watch, but as a reader, that obviously the wildlings are going to know where they are. So yeah, Chett is correct in this assumption. Thorin Smallwood declares they will take the fight to Mance instead of waiting. Mormont reveals the plan to ride at dawn, moving north and circling west to ambush the wildlings. They aim to strike multiple points along the stretched-out column, making their small force seem much larger. Smallwood adds they will hit quickly, retreat, and strike again, targeting supplies, animals, and as many people as possible. Their goal is to either scatter the wildlings back north or harass them all the way to the wall. And this is the problem with this, is not only has Mormont made a catastrophically bad decision by bringing the main bulk of their strength north of the wall and all this, now he's planning to, for the most part, go on a suicide mission that likely would never work. And so at that point, you really got to question, what is Mormont's legacy? Because he basically cripples the Night's Watch by himself. And yes, you can't expect that, they're going to be attacked by the others, the White Walkers, but he's the one that placed him in this situation. That's all I'm going to say. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think about Mormont's plan or Thorin Smallwood's plan. I just think this is just really stupid in my opinion. Some men express fear, noting the overwhelming numbers and the likelihood of death. Macelin openly says they will die, while the Raven echoes the word die. A little bit of foreshadowing too. Most of these men will die. Mormont acknowledges many or all will perish, but reminds them of their duty as the Night's Watch invoke their oath. As we get into page 12, the men finish reciting their oath, drawing swords and shouting together as one unified force. Chett joins in outwardly, noting his fellow conspirators blend in to avoid suspicion. After the shouting fades, the wind and the raven's cry of die fill the silence. Chett thinks that the bird is quite clever given their assassination plan, but in reality, it's almost like this bird is warning them of their incoming doom. And maybe this is Bloodraven's manipulation trying to warn them to leave, but they are not doing so. And you can see why this doesn't work. Think about later on when Mormont is betrayed. It's this moment of, let's remember our vows, this, heroic, noble thing. It doesn't work when things start to get more and more desperate, and you already have people planning to assassinate you at this moment, and things haven't even gotten that desperate yet. The officers then dismiss the men, telling them to rest before the planned attack at dawn. As Chett lies down near the dogs, his mind is racing with fears about the plan failing. He worries about betrayal, mistakes in timing, or someone losing their nerve. Listening to the night, he notices the eerie quiet and the unsettling sounds of wind and distant camp noise. So there's two things I actually think is really awesome the way George writes this. Is one, obviously you're going to be super nervous about this. This is going to either be your freedom or your death. And so that's really important. I do really love the way that George has built the atmosphere in this chapter. The way he's gone about where Chett's lying down and he now can hear everything. In terms of the quiet, in terms of the wind and the sound it's making, it builds for a very eerie finale to this chapter. And even in this moment, he unexpectedly thinks of Bessa, recalling bringing her flowers rather than the violence he's associated with her before. Why is he thinking about her in this way before? In the past, he's only thought about her in spite and all this stuff, but it comes back to the main conflict that George writes about, the heart at conflict. And regardless of what you want to say about Chett, he's remembering that because it is something, a feeling that he maybe can look to in this moment of stress nearing his possible death that he can hold on to. Confused and unsettled, he struggles to breathe and wonders if he has fallen asleep. Snow then begins to fall, and Chett realizes it will ruin everything. Something that the books do a lot better than I think the show does is understanding that snow very much creates massive problems for troop movements, for people just moving in general, and for Chett, it's going to ruin everything. The snowfall will cover tracks, hide supplies, and make escape nearly impossible. It will also make it easier for others to track them and more dangerous to travel at night. Chett concludes their plan is doomed before it even begins. And even worse is you can't reschedule this plan. Because, for one, you now have to go tell everyone, hey, don't do the plan, but also you're riding off to war, tomorrow. So, this is just gone completely terrible for Chett. And that's what I mean when I say, even though Chett's plan is good, it still runs into this problem of the weather. Mother Nature comes to spite you. His dreams of power, freedom, and a new life collapse, leaving only the prospect of death. And I'd also add in there revenge as we get into page 13. Chett recalls how Snow and Sam once ruined his life, reigniting his hatred. He gets up in the falling snow, struggling through the camp as visibility worsens. And he also gets lost in the tents for a little while. I think that's also some nice foreshadowing to book 5. Like I said, a lot of the first 3 books, in my opinion, do a very good job of introducing elements that are then going to pay off, especially in the latter books that follow them. Determined to salvage something, he decides to at the very least kill Samwell Tarly. After getting lost among the tents, he finds Sam sleeping near the raven cages, buried under blankets and snow. Chett quietly draws his dagger and approaches, planning to silence Sam and kill him, as the ravens stir, muttering "snow" as he moves closer. And I really wonder with this, is this an indication by the ravens, aka Blood Raven, to warn that the White Walkers / the others are approaching them, to warn them to get prepared or to leave? Or is this a warning to wake up Sam so he's not killed by Chett? Up for debate, I would say. Just before Chett is going to strike at Sam, a distant horn blast echoes through the camp. As of right now, completely normal. This just means Rangers are coming back. But Chett realizes it signals returning brothers and curses the timing as it's going to wake up Sam. He considers it might be scouts like Cor and Halfhand returning, possibly even with Jon Snow alive. But as Sam wakes in confusion as the camp begins to stir, the ravens start cawing and the dogs barking. The animals sense something is coming that maybe the humans do not. Chett waits frustrated, hoping the noise will stop so he can act. But then a second horn blasts, louder and longer. And this is when you really run into some deep shit, because now it's an attack, right? This is wildlings. So at this point, people are going to start panicking, as Sam does. He scrambles to arm himself while asking if he imagined the horns. Chett confirms it's real and explains that 2 horn blasts means enemies are approaching. He tells Sam that it signals wildlings, implying danger is imminent. As we get into page 14, Chett finds Sam's fear amusing, cursing the wildlings and the failed expectation of their timing. And here's the thing. With Chett at this point, he believes his life is over. His failed coup is not going to work. He's planning to kill Sam this night, which will ultimately lead to his death. Even if he doesn't do that, in the coming battle with the wildlings, he's going to die. Chett basically is a man that believes his time is up. And so that is very dangerous. That's something that Ned tells Bran all the way back in book 1. So that to me, I think, is a nice little callback as well. But at this, we get one of the craziest twists of an opening chapter as a third horn blast sounds, long and unending, shaking the entire camp. The ravens go wild, flapping and screaming as chaos spreads among the Night's Watch. The brothers rush to arm themselves, grabbing weapons and preparing for battle. Sam, terrified, realizes that there have been 3 blasts, something unheard of for centuries. He recalls that 3 blasts signal something far worse than wildlings. Chett confirms the meaning: the others. Overwhelmed, Chett breaks down, half laughing and half sobbing, as he loses control in fear, pissing himself, calling back to what he said Samwell would do in a fight. And that's where the chapter ends. It's a hell of a way to start a Storm of Swords. In terms of the others are now attacking Sam, and the Brothers of the Night's Watch and that's where the chapter ends. It's a crazy ending. And I think of the 3 chapters that we've gotten to start the books, it has the craziest plot twist. In my opinion, I do still have it as the weakest, even though I was talking up a bunch about it and how it combines elements of both the first prologue chapter and the second prologue chapter with the last 2 books respectively. I do really just have a preference of, I really love Cressen's opening chapter, even if it's super long, and it telling the story of Stannis and our introduction into him and Dragonstone. And I really like the character of Cressen. And then going back to the first book, well, the first book is just really iconic in the way it starts off the series. I love the way that the others make their first appearance. Here, I think a fantastic way of George starting out this book. I don't think it's anything like crazy. It's not a 10 out of 10 chapter or anything for me, but it's a very good one. It's a very good start. And especially when you look at a Clash of Kings, where I would even go back as far as saying a Game of Thrones too, both of those books start out, I would say, a little slower and then kind of find their footing as the story goes on. I would say A Storm of Swords is kind of similar because it feels like, oh, once you hit the Red Wedding, which is more towards like the middle to 2/3 into the book, it's when everything hits the fan. This book, I think, starts out in a way that's like, yeah, you understand what this book's going to be. It's going to be a payoff book with a lot of plot twists, a lot of big, spectacular moments that are going to pay off from book 2 and 1. It's a nice open, and I hope you guys are excited for the Storm of Swords reread. I will not see a reaction probably to this video for a while, as I'm trying to basically bulk record a lot of these first opening episodes so that I have more time, that I don't have to be on a strict schedule of when I want to get these done every single week. So yeah, I hope you guys really do enjoy this. Make sure you turn on those notifications so you don't miss an upload, as these will be coming out every week for the most part from probably the next like 1.5 to 2 years as we take on the challenge of A Storm of Swords and rereading through most people's favorite book of the series.